If, if you have any questions along the way, we can make this up close and personal as you want it to be. So, just let me know. And I will go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. I have worked at Arizona State University now for about 35 years, went to school there as well. So lots of history with ASU, and have been doing health promotion, prevention work during this whole time. And as a young professional, I was fortunate enough to be a part of a group of college health professionals who questioned the norms and set the stage for making data-based program decisions. At the time that I started working in this arena, programs were developed really based on interest, staff interest, government interest, department interest. And at the time, health education was a new profession, and we were poised to ask why and to develop mechanisms that would assist us and assist others in determining what health behaviors to address and to make data-based decisions. So we explored the question, why evaluate? And I learned that many college health professionals do see the value of gathering data, evaluating programs, and making data-based decisions, but that many don't know where to start, or they have a restrictive budget and not enough staff, or staffing that wouldn't really fit well for an evaluator or someone who handles data. They can't necessarily see how to fit evaluation in their day-to-day operation. And so in this webinar, my aim is to provide greater motivation for evaluating, provide some ideas about structures for getting started, and to help you think through how to solve the challenges and the reasons not to evaluate, and then launch you into the next steps to evaluate your own programs and initiatives. Wherever you fall into the continuum of evaluation is alien to me, I'd like to be doing more. This program should be a good fit for you, keeping in mind, of course, that this is 1 hour long and that we can't do everything in an hour, right? So this is what we're going to talk about: why evaluate, when, what are the basics, what are some challenges, and how to get started. So Milton Friedman was an American economist, statistician, and writer who taught at the University of Chicago for more than 3 decades. And he says that one of the great mistakes is to judge policies and programs by their intentions rather than by their results. And I think that we can often relate to this, and that ultimately data should be driving what we do and how we do it. So when do you get started evaluating, or why would we evaluate is really what this slide is showing us. So I jumped ahead a little, but we evaluate because you don't just know what's needed or whether something's working or not. We want to understand whether the process that we're using is working or not. We need to know where to start with our students. Do we start at square one, or do they already know all that stuff and we can skip to square 8? We want to validate our efforts and the efforts that other people are putting forth to improve student well-being. We want to determine what works, prove the benefits of what we're doing, the sort of return on investment of what we're doing. We want to measure success and be able to report that out. We want to seek funding, so it helps if we're evaluating what we're doing, so we can provide those reports both in our applications for grants and donations, and also to give those reports back to them about what we're doing well, sharing our results with our colleagues as well, and then making program decisions. And my big one is, my big two probably are making program decisions and engaging in continuous quality improvement. That evaluation isn't really, in my mind, a judgment against a particular program or a judgment for it. It is a way to figure out if something is working and how we might be able to tweak it to get it to work better. It can be used to eliminate programs, of course, and or to switch out programs, but really it should be a way of us getting to know what's happening within our programs and how we might be able to improve them. When to evaluate? Well, if we're evaluating before we get started, that would be considered a formative evaluation. If we're evaluating during a program or initiative, that's typically more looking at the process and maybe the outcomes. Is the process working in ways that are smooth and will help us accomplish this, whatever outcome that we're seeking, and or are the outcomes what we want them to be, what we intend them to be? And then after are really those impact evaluations and summative evaluations. Now, evaluation should be part of a planning process. So this is my little drawing of a planning process. And I would start at the top at 12 o'clock with problem analysis, like what's going on within the student community. And from what's going on, picking what problems you want to address and setting some goals and objectives and what are those desired outcomes. So really thinking about focus groups and surveys, ways to really get into what are going to be our specific goals and objectives and what are going to be the metrics that we're trying to change. And then we move into like, okay, we know those kinds of things. What are the methodologies we're going to use? We're going to select some strategies. And then as we begin to implement those strategies, we're going to take note of the process inputs and outputs and activities. What is the process that we're using? And is the process effective? And I'll give a quick example. Of a few years ago at ASU, we had started posting posters in each of the residence halls. These posters came out once per month, and we were evaluating the posters by doing a combination of survey, like mall surveys where we would stop people and ask them as they were going into or coming out of a residence hall, whether they had seen the posters and, what was the main message of the poster, and did they think they were going to do that message? And if they had already done that, could they give us an example of how they had used that kind of information in a real life situation? So a way of evaluating, right? Well, what we ended up finding out was that, in fact, in some residence halls, the numbers of students who had even seen the posters was really, really small. So as a part of our process evaluation, we went in to find out like what's happening here. And what we learned was that we had delivered posters, but that they had never been posted. They had just sat behind the front desk. And so people weren't seeing the posters in the residence halls. That is a process evaluation. Is the process that we're using working? If it's not working, we can fix the process in some way to help it to work better so that people are getting the message, whatever the process or whatever the program is can be implemented better. And as a result, we might actually get some outcomes that we're looking for. And then last but not least is, how we're evaluating the actual, effectiveness of the program itself. And so, for example, if I go back to this example of the posters in the residence halls, when we found out that people didn't get what the posters meant, for example, then we would go back to the drawing board and say, what should we have said differently to make this point? And we would invite in a group of students to help us clarify the message in the poster and what the ask was of the students for a particular behavior, so that we could improve that intervention. And back to improving that, what ultimately we want to do with our evaluation is improve our program, improve our efforts, so that when at the end of the day, we're successful. It wasn't a waste of money or time or effort, and that we're able to see our results not only in the numbers of people that saw a poster or that attended a program, but that we also are seeing results in our survey data. So I just have listed here some different types of evaluation for either if you're evaluating a specific program, and I just really covered those ones. And then if you're evaluating a comprehensive effort, so let's say you're trying to improve alcohol risk, or reduce alcohol use among underage students, well, you might be instituting lots of different types of programs and messages, and you have a comprehensive plan that you're working with. And so ultimately, you're going to be using more of a logic model, maybe some larger scale surveys, certainly looking at the processes of all of these different pieces of the comprehensive plan, looking for outcomes in ways that the environment provides to us, might be through police reports or social media analyses or analytics, etc., and then looking for impact from a population level survey. So in covering the basics of evaluation, I just want to go over these pieces: population data and how to use that, the logic model, program reports, surveys, and then just basically using your data. So let's start with population data. This is the type of data that's collected through a random sample survey that helps you to monitor trends and establish health behavior goals for your population. And I have 4 tips that I just want to share with you for collecting and using population level data. First is I recommend that you use a standard survey or assessment like the National College Health Assessment, the WIShes survey, etc. Whatever it is that you choose to use, make sure that you can add questions of your own. You can compare your results with national or regional peers. And my second big tip is to use a population approved incentive. When you're collecting data from students, you want to make sure that whatever incentivizes them, I know that's probably not a real verb, but whatever incentivizes them to take the survey, you want to be right on top of that. So, finding out from your students what it is that will entice them to take the survey. Is it money? Is it a lot of money that a few people get? Is it a little bit of money that everyone gets? Is it a free ticket to a game? Is it what is it that is really going to entice them? And if it is money, how much money will it take to get them to take a survey of whatever length that you are asking them to take? So we've learned is that $200 will entice students to take a survey the size of the National College Health Assessment. And then we usually give either $25 or $50 incentives to a number of, like through a drawing for smaller scale surveys. Like if we're doing a social marketing survey to find out if our social marketing strategies are working, those students might get like a $25 because it only takes them like 3 seconds really to complete the survey, but we want them to do it and money works. Another tip is to choose a timeline that works for your institution and for your purposes. So, for example, you may need to survey the population every year for grant reports, to apply for grants, to monitor progress on your goals for the grant. But it's time consuming to process that much data or a lot of data every year. So if you can wait to do it every other year, a large population survey, you might want to do it every other year. My fourth tip is to always prepare for dissemination of the data. Put the data in context, check with your administration about when, how, and who you can release the data to. And at ASU, we use the data very specifically for reports, presentations, priority, and goal setting. At other institutions, I've seen them place the data online in lots of different ways. We use our data at ASU in our Live Well at ASU website, but reserve the majority of the data for really use in planning and evaluating. So population data gives you the foundation from which you can determine what impacts you want to create. These data can convince funders to fund your program, can help you get the staff you need to implement it, and really help to get the attention and partners that you need to be effective. It's important that you tell the story of the data in a way that's relevant to any funders that you might be either trying to entice to fund you or that you might be sending reports to. And of course, we always want our funders to fund us again. So you want to be able to tell them a story that's accurate and that's meaningful to them. If you have interesting or compelling data, it will open doors for you. So I'm going to use the next slide to provide some examples of what data you might be able to use from a population survey to set goals and metrics to evaluate your impact across the population and across a number of years. So I'm using 2 different years. These are national data, just so that you know where they come from. They're from the NCHA spring 2019 and 2020, again, national data. So we're looking here at alcohol use among underage and freshman students. So underage alcohol use in 2019 and 20. So it went up in 2020, which, by the way, was the 2019 spring was right before, well, was the year before the pandemic. And 2020 was the year of the pandemic, but the data from the survey are all from before the pandemic really was underway. So we can see freshman alcohol use went up during that same time frame, that underage binge drinking went up a little, and that freshman binge drinking went up a little bit more. Now, binge drinking, the way that I'm using that term, is 5 or more drinks in a sitting within the last 2 weeks, at least one time. So this can give you information about where to start. Oh, we want to improve our underage binge drinking. We want it to go back down below 2019 levels and continue to get lower, for example. So here's another slide, similar, but it drills down into a specific student population. So here we have alcohol use among underage fraternity sorority members compared to their non-fraternity sorority life peers. So underage alcohol use among FSL members is much higher and went up between 2019 and 2020. These are the non-FSL folks. Went up about the same amount, 5%, 6%. Underage binge drinking went up among folks in FSL quite significantly more so than it did with those not in FSL. So maybe binge drinking, this is a goal that we can set to reduce binge drinking among students who are members of fraternities and sororities, because not only did it go up, but their rates are double that of the rest of the student population. So by bringing their rates down, you're actually gonna bring this rate down, because a small percentage of the population is bringing the rate up from 23%. So you can see that. Next, we have alcohol use among underage fraternity and sorority members by their gender identities. So this is drilling down into that fraternity sorority population even more so that we can see what is happening with these students. Underage alcohol use by female members of FSL, by male members of FSL, and by trans or gender non-binary members. And then underage binge drinking. Now we've already seen that binge drinking seems to be the bigger problem. And here we have it. It's the male members. Not that these numbers are great, but these are the students that are most involved in binge drinking. Now, setting a goal for what you want the metric to become in order to evaluate what happens within this particular population after you're done with your programs and initiatives that you implement to change their binge drinking rate. It's always that question of, well, what do we set our goal to? We know what the baseline metrics are that we want to change, but we don't necessarily know how big of a change to predict that we can make based on this. So one of the things that I like to do is look at the data sort of strung out like this. So the question about about binge drinking asks if they didn't engage in binge drinking, if they did once, 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 or more times. It actually asks 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or more times. So you could get into a lot of details. But what I like to do is go like, all right, could we maybe move some of these 3 timers down into 2 times, or some of these 2 timers down into 1 time? Maybe we might not be as lucky to get into the none, like I didn't engage in binge drinking at all. But maybe we can do something with these. So maybe a 2% or a 3% within a year's time that we might be able to change, and then adjust that when we find out like what really is reasonable to expect given the level of programming that we're doing with that population, or the policy change that we're implementing, or whatever it is that we're doing, whatever our strategies are. If we think that they're powerful enough to make a 3% change, but not expecting, a 10% change, because literally there aren't that many people in these really high risk groups to bring down into these lower risk binge drinking groups. So that's one way. Another way, I think I did do this. So this is just a different type of question, a Likert type question that asks about whether they agree or disagree that they belong at ASU or their university. In the case of this, it is national data, so it's their university. And so I pulled out freshmen, and we're looking at those who strongly disagree to strongly agree. And one of the ways that I'll pick or that will work out, like what percentage should we aim for to improve the percentage or the proportion of students who are freshmen who feel like they belong at ASU, is maybe to go from somewhat agree to agree like to improve this and this. Maybe we can get someone who disagrees up here, but these are very unique people. These people already agree, so we might be able to just push them into the next level of experience. So just thinking along those lines, like how to use the data to make a decision on what metric you're gonna aim for, so that you can evaluate your efforts. And then if that doesn't work that year or that semester or that month, however often you're collecting the data that you're collecting, then you can take a step back and say, well, maybe we were too ambitious, or maybe we weren't ambitious enough, but maybe we were too ambitious and didn't realize how hard it is to change people's feelings about whether they belong to our university or at our university or not. Maybe we need to do more in order to really get those big changes. And then, talk to your administrators and your leaders about what you need in order to be more effective in reaching those goals. Next, we have the use of a logic model. So when I'm looking at a big comprehensive plan, I'm thinking, how does this big comprehensive plan all fit together or work together towards the metric or the goal that we have set, right? So this is what a logic model does. It allows you to think through how everything, the arrow at the bottom, points in the direction of the outcomes that you intend to make happen. So this is an example from sexual violence and victimization. So I like to start with the outcome and back out as to, well, if this is what we're planning to make happen, and you can put the percentage, you can make this into a SMART goal, of course, which includes the percentage and the time frame and where you're going to get the data and all that kind of stuff. But then you back down from that and you say, well, what else could we measure to see if we're making progress towards this goal? So how many policies and procedures, new policies and procedures did we put into place? And, what were they addressing? Did we have enhanced enforcement? Because that's one of the strategies that we can use. So if we have enhanced enforcement, what does that look like in terms of measuring that? Did we have increased awareness? What does that look like? We might be looking at analytics of people who follow a bulk message to your school's engagement app, back to a website that has resources or information, those kinds of things. Who's following a social media prompt to a particular bit of information that you want them to have? How about improved in knowledge, attitudes, and behavior? It's based on your efforts. So how are you going to measure that? Maybe when you're doing presentations, you're going to have a survey. Maybe when you're doing a social marketing campaign, you're going to do some type of mall survey, stopping passersby to see if they saw the social marketing materials and what they learned from them. Bystander engagement, you might be measuring. So are people engaged with bystanders? We actually ask bystander engagement questions on our annual survey because we want to know, are they noticing when things are happening around them? And if they do notice, are they doing something about it? And what is it? Well, we don't ask what they're doing anymore, but do they do something or do they not do something? And we have asked in the past if they chose not to do something or if they didn't do anything because they weren't sure what to do. So that gives us an idea of what percentage of students notice when something's wrong and whether that compares to what we're observing in our survey data. Is the population's, experience of those kinds of things. And then we're also just noticing whether, or we're looking at the data to see if once they notice, do they take action? And primarily they do, by the way. And then how do you measure student activism so that you can get information about all these different areas? Here are the activities that we do in our efforts to decrease sexual violence, penetration, and victimization, or perpetration, and victimization. So we do mandatory education, bystander training, peer engagement, social marketing, policy review, and enforcement training. And these are our inputs. These are the things that we have that we can use to make all of this work. So this is a very basic logic model. You could draw arrows all over it, like this helps this happen, helps this happen. But basically a logic model takes you from what you have, what kinds of activities you're going to implement, what are your short-term outcomes, and what are your products and your short-term outcomes that you're hoping to accomplish, and then what are your ultimate outcomes. And this can help you then visualize your plan, but also what evaluation processes you might utilize within the context of that plan. Next, we have program data, and I'm just moving right into a sample of program data that we collect on a regular basis. Collecting program data requires that you have protocols and tools for counting the number of participants, the number of views, the number of giveaways, the number of discussions, etc., the number of peer educators, the list goes on and on. Who are your partners? Once the data, like what we have here, when, what was the month, what was the date, who was the staff presenter, was it a single or multiple presenter that was there? What's the focus area? In this case, it was sexual violence prevention. What was the title of the presentation? Who was the group that was being trained? What's the name of the group? What's the type of group? Where was the location? Which campus did it take place at? Who was our main contact person for that? What time did it start? What time did it end? Therefore, how long was it? Did we do some type of data collection method, sign-in sheets, estimated numbers? Did we use an evaluation method? None and none. So we don't always do that really well. How many people were there? We have a sign-in sheet so we can say, because we ask, what their gender identity is. We ask what some other identity features like race, ethnicity, year in school, things like that. So we get all of that stuff into the data that we're collecting. And then we can say there were 27 students. The length of time was 1 hour. So the student involvement hours was 27 and the staff hour that they actually were implementing that was 1. So it gives you an idea. In this case, they didn't do a data collection method, so we don't know who these students are. We just know there were 27 of them. So again, good tracking methodologies. Obviously, we had to have sign-in sheets, we had to have evaluations, all of those kinds of things in order to bring that data back and enter it in our tracking program. Charles Babbage was a British inventor and mathematician. During the 1830s, he developed plans for the analytical engine, which was the forerunner of the modern computer. So he said, errors using inadequate data are much less than errors using no data at all. So having data is better than not having data, even if you're not doing it perfectly. Okay, survey types. Here we go. When you're building a survey or when you're choosing a survey, you start with the end in mind. You decide what the learning objectives are, and you decide how you will know that you've achieved them. So we start when we're building a survey in a similar way that we start with the logic model, with the end in mind. What kind of behavior change are we driving with this? And then going back to, in order to get that behavior change, what kind of knowledge do they need to know? What kind of attitude do we expect someone to have who engages in this behavior? Do they intend to change that behavior as a result of this presentation? And maybe when do they plan to change it? And do you have the opportunity in the time that you have to provide some type of skills training so that they actually have some way to know how to engage in that behavior differently than they have in the past? So that is what we try to do with our surveys, is to ask questions around knowledge, attitudes, behaviors and behavior intentions, behavior in general, how comfortable they feel engaging in a particular skill that we provided training on. We like to try to use open-ended questions along the way and to collect demographics so that if there are groups within a group that are struggling more to get to the intended outcome of the session, then we can go back to the drawing board and say, wow, what's preventing the men in this audience from making this transition or making this shift? Or what's preventing the freshmen in this population or in this subpopulation from moving in the direction? You know, are we not saying something? Does this not resonate with them? Are we missing some really important information or attitude piece that that would help them? So you hopefully get some opportunity to look at those questionnaires, and then you figure out whether you're meeting your mark and how you're not, and which populations are doing better and which aren't, and then go back to the drawing board, right? So which tools do you use when? Questionnaires I like to use when we have a captive audience. We've used a little grade card that we call Give It a Grade. Those we've used at events. So, you know, you're outside, you still want to know that your efforts are worthwhile or not, so that you can either say, we shouldn't spend so much time tabling, or we shouldn't spend so much time doing these large scale events. They're not motivating behavior change. But we can ask on a Give It a Grade, we can ask to literally grade this. What did you think overall? What's the grade that you would give this event? And then maybe ask a qualitative question, why? And then we like to ask a few simple questions like, which of these learnings did you gain during this event? So we have some particular learning objectives that we are incorporating into our plans for the event. And we want to know, do students feel like they got that learning there? Did it help them understand a concept better? Did it move their attitude a little bit anyway? What's their own self-assessment of that? We can ask people to reflect on their experiences and what helped them the most. We can also ask them like a single question questionnaire, you know, write down or send us to this Qualtrics your answer to this question. What was the one thing in this presentation that would compel you to talk to someone when they're in danger from drinking too much alcohol? Or what would you do in this particular situation the next time you encounter it, so that you're getting some information all the time about what changes are happening as a result of what you're doing. And then when I say all the time, I need to check myself at the door, right? So to speak. We don't survey people all the time. It would just create way more survey information than we want, but often enough so that we have a good idea of how our programs are doing with new student populations that we haven't used them with before, with subpopulations that we've adapted intervention for, or we just want to find out if it's really working the way that we hoped it would. We would like to do it more often. Be nice. So we have a few different types of questions that we use: true, false, or don't know questions. They might sound something like this. An indirect intervention means asking another person to be the primary helper. Is that true or false? Or maybe I don't know. Likert scale type question about agreeing or disagreeing, that something should be done to intervene in problematic situations. So you saw that earlier with the example of belonging, strongly disagree to strongly agree, and are they moving in the direction you want them to go? How likely are you to ask others to help you intervene in a problematic situation, like if someone has had too much to drink, for example? Very unlikely to very likely. See if they change. What part of the program helped you most? So this can be either a multiple choice type, or it can also be like an open-ended question that they are able to just give you feedback. What part of this helped you the most? Of course, there are other ways to evaluate what you're doing. Here are some of them. Doing an environmental scan. So that is a process where you identify things in the campus environment that tell you whether the culture, something about the culture of the students and the messages that they're either comfortable with or that they're seeing in the environment that, for example, either promote a high level of drinking or don't promote a high level of drinking. So, for example, an environmental scan might look at what's for sale at the bookstore and the stores in the student union. How many student organizations are focused on partying, and how many student organizations are focused on healthier ways of engaging together? How many activities are there for students to do? How early does your student union close up at night? How early does your student fitness center close up at night? Is it too early, and so no one can come and engage in those activities after 10, and they end up going out to parties where there's alcohol, or to bars, and ultimately drinking too much, for example, that kind of thing. Looking at your policies and seeing if new policies have been put into place and if they are functioning the way that they're meant to function. Looking at the count of your conduct cases, what types of conduct cases, where are they taking place, etc. Are they going down? Are they going up according to the work that you're doing within a particular residence hall or neighborhood off campus? For example, you might look at your police records, what number of calls that the dean's office gets. We have like a hotline for neighborhood members or community members to call the dean's office with complaints or situations that involve students off campus. And, are we getting a high number of calls, and what are those calls about? Will help us to evaluate whether our alcohol risk reduction strategies are working. what are the number of partnerships that we have that are working with us? And what does partnership mean to them? You know, do you have like a particular resource that these partners are contributing? And how effective are they at contributing that resource? Is it money? Is it time? Is it a programmatic thing that they're doing? And are they 100% into that? Of course, you can look at all of your different analytics regarding the messages that you push out into the environment. And then again, qualitative feedback and observations. What's happening with students in different residence halls? You can interview and find out what's going on from students, what their stress levels are, how they feel about the types of social activities that are available to them in regard to like, do they, I know our students will often say that they think everyone drinks and that their non-drinking habits or preferences are, they feel stigmatized by them. And so, you know, what that kind of information can be helpful in helping to promote additional activities and also just promote that non-drinking lifestyle or the less drinking lifestyle as viable and something that a lot of students choose. So, are you too busy to improve? Well, we need to use whatever our evaluation results are to improve, but I love this little cartoon. I borrowed it from Allison Smith from New York University. You know, this idea of we're too busy to really think about making improvements as we go. But wouldn't it make it a lot easier if the wagon worked better? So we need to take time to make improvements. What I have pictured here is a PDSA cycle that stems from the science of improvement. And the reason that I have this up is because a PDSA cycle presumes that it takes a lot of trials to make something better, to, you know, really find that sweet spot that makes what you're doing work better, whether it's a process, whether it's a behavior change, a presentation that you're doing, an event that you're doing, a message that you have out there, that literally using a plan, do, study, act cycle multiple times will help you know these things. You plan, you decide what you're trying to accomplish, you decide what you're aiming for. How will we know that whatever we change about this process is going to be or has been an improvement? And then what are we going to change? All right. So this is a plan, do, study, act cycle, and that ultimately using PDSA cycles to improve looks something like this. You identify and refine what your improvement priorities are. You work together to understand what's going on right now. You build a theory of what you think will help make it better, whatever it is that you're working on. And then you do PDSA cycle. And then you go back to the drawing board, you identify and, you know, like, did this really create an improvement over how we were doing it before? Did people understand better? Did we get more people going from the prompt to the web page or from the prompt to the self-assessment, whatever it is that we're doing? And if we didn't get as many as we wanted, then what can we tweak to see if we can get it this time, and keep doing that? And typically a PDSA cycle is done in a sort of smaller scale, testing. And then when you think you've got it right, or pretty darn right, then you start to scale it. So this might be a presentation that you're perfecting for freshmen, but you're mostly focused on freshmen and this particular residence hall while you're developing it, and then you expand it. Or the messages are going out to this particular student population, and then you're expanding it to other student populations. In my world, data is exciting. But for a lot of people, the statistics are boring. And Edward Tufte, who is an American statistician and professor emeritus of political science at Yale University, says, if the statistics are boring, you have the numbers wrong. So I'm just going to show you a few things that we've used. So this is the inside of our Performing Arts Center, Greater Gamage. It seats about 5,000 people. I'm probably getting the numbers wrong today. I'm thinking that out loud to myself, right? So if I'm going to talk about 5,000 students do this, or, engaged in this activity, or experienced sexual assault, or 1,000 students, if I can pick a venue that people are familiar with and show them that number of students, they have that picture in their mind in ways that they don't when they just see the numbers. So finding things that people can relate to and sharing your data by using those things is really helpful. Here's a relevant scene. We use this one for a number of different reasons. So 1 out of 10 students has a problem with alcohol. So you can start to do 1 out of 10. What we did was we sort of circled 1 out of 10 in this picture to help faculty realize that this isn't just about student health and wellness services and all of us who do this kind of work, but you're encountering these students all the time in your classrooms. What you do matters, right? And then creative visuals. So alcohol influences student success. Our data, this is actually ASU data from several years ago, but it showed that students who drank on average 2.25 drinks the last time they partied or socialized had an A student GPA that they reported. Students who drank 3.4 drink, or a BC student had 3.4 drinks, and a D student had 4.2 drinks. So it shows, the more you drink, the lower your grades are likely to be. Okay, so moving right along to some of the challenges and concerns that I run into when I'm trying to get people to evaluate more, right? So of course, the lack of time and resources. And what do you do if you're lacking time and resources? Well, one thing that I did was I made evaluation a priority. Like, we are going to do it. We need it for our grants. We need it for ourselves. We need it to show results to our higher ups, because a lot of times, I don't know about you, but a lot of times they want us to do things that there's no reason to believe that those things will be effective at changing behavior, right? And so ultimately, I want to evaluate those things that they're asking us to do, that they're telling us to do, so that I can show this we did and we got great results. This we did, not so much. Had really nice numbers if that's what you're looking for. But if you're looking for behavior change, and I think we are, this is what we need to do, and we need to be able to scale it out. And these are the resources I need in order to do that. Using an external evaluator can add some costs, but it can also save you from having someone, having to hire or use a member of your staff who has other things to do that evaluation component. Maybe a graduate assistant, or what we call a management intern, can take that on as a grad student position part-time, something like that. Or partner with campus experts who know how to do this stuff and maybe have students that they're working with who would love to do a research project for their master's program or for their honors undergrad program that would involve the work that you're doing. There's, of course, the fear of evaluation that we run into, which is, I just say, focus then on your CQI stuff, your continuous quality improvement. Don't be fearful of evaluation. Use the science of improvement. Lean into the idea that you, what do we call it? Fail forward. Like, try something, see if it works. If it doesn't, that's okay, because the whole idea is to make things better, and you don't know if you don't measure it. Getting or providing inaccurate reports, like, how do we get that going? This is where you create forms and you conduct training, and you start to get a more accurate and consistent reporting from your people. And hopefully you spread that across other units so that you're using similar ways of describing the types of activities that you're doing across campus, and ultimately can then compare better what's happening, or report better what's happening across the different units. Using faulty evaluation tools, you can use validated tools, and or use the science of improvement. Again, there are ways to do these things that are going to help. And then this idea that it's not possible to measure impact because it's hard to get that kind of data on systems-wide kinds of things. You just use interim measures. One of the facts that this points to is the idea that we can't really measure the number of suicides we prevent, but we can measure the proportion of suicidality, right? We might not be able to measure the number of deaths from alcohol or other drugs, but we can measure if drinking went down or if combining drugs went down, that kind of thing. So you can measure those sort of interim goals. And then just, some thoughts for you. What are your next steps? Getting your team ready, developing record-keeping tools, selecting a survey, developing your questionnaires, analyzing them, presenting your data, taking an evaluation course, hiring somebody to do it, or finding research partners. Whatever your next steps are, set them as a goal. Write them down. You'll be more likely to take those steps. And just letting you know that you're welcome to contact me. I probably should have put it in here, but I'm certain that Annabelle will list my contact information on the website where she posts this presentation. And I'm just hopeful that this has been something helpful to you, and that ultimately, if you do have questions, please do reach out to me, and I'll be happy to have a chat with you and answer questions or help you think through a process. So thank you all for being here today. Just want to take a minute if you do have a question right away. I know that we're at time, but I see that you're still on, so I don't want to close if you're ready to, step forward and ask a question. Okay. Well, thank you very much, and have a good summer.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. And for those that hopped in later, I will send the recording out whenever we get done. And then I will also post on our website so you guys will have access. Thank you, Ben Karen, for the wonderful information and sharing your expertise, because it's going to be really helpful for planning.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.